Hello and welcome to Cinema to the Letter. This episode, it's that indie known as Phantasm. On Cinema to the Letter, we break down the very nature of cinema, letter by letter. For each episode of a film miniseries topic, we cover 6 films that fit either C for classic, I for indie, N for new, E for egregious, M for masterpiece, or A for atypical. Who doesn't love an acronym, am I right? I am Thomas, and the funeral is about to begin, sir. Or ma'am, or those of non-binary identifications.
Hi, I'm Bryan, and I've come to get you, boy. I can't do.
It's hard.
He's
It's hard. It's
really
such a specific
hard.
voice. Yes.
Yeah, he's so good at it.
But we're not the only ones here, Bryan, because coming through a dimensional portal, a voice you might have heard if you listen to the old Double-Edged Double Bill show that used to be on this feed. He was the co-host of that former show, and he is a true tall man in his own right. My boy, Adam Thomas. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, man. So are all ice cream men just perverts? Is that what we're gonna get? It's like that's what we're getting at here.
I mean, there's him. There's Clint Howard from Ice Cream Man, the amazing '90s slasher movie. That's a real movie.
Yeah, the Spawn villain like Billy Kincaid. I think they're all perverts and just horrible people. Sorry if I offended some of your core audience.
Maybe, perhaps. But I mean, Reggie, I would argue, is the least offender of, I would say, that mix.
Well, yeah, of that mix, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
But he's still not great. If you watch any of the sequels, we'll talk about it. Here. But yes, everybody, we're here for our second episode of our spooky horror miniseries, which is our Eye for Indie. And we're doing the original Phantasm, released in 1979, March 28th, 1979. And Adam, after our show collapsed in on itself, and I said, like, the second season we're doing horror, and you're the first person I asked to be a guest. We're having, hopefully, a couple other guests besides Adam later in the season. But you immediately latched on to Phantasm. And what drew you to Phantasm originally? What's your history with Don Coscarelli's Phantasm and its sequels and whatnot?
Well, one of the main reasons is, as you know, like I said, we did our old show together, and we always did a big thing for spooky season. But even before that, I was guesting on various horror themed podcasts, still do from time to time. And I've thought about it. I've never gotten the chance to talk about Phantasm, like, ever. It's never come up. And Don Coscarelli, even, I can't think of one Coscarelli movie I've talked about. I mean, there's a bunch out there: Boba Hotep, John Dies at the End, Beastmaster, all those movies, and I've never had the chance to talk Coscarelli or The Tall Man or Phantasm or Reggie or Michael or Jody, and never got the chance. So that's when I saw it. I was like, oh, okay, at least it's something different for me. Anyways.
Right.
I don't really give a fuck about anybody
else. You can see why the show dissolved previously. Just that. But yeah, I definitely was glad that you decided to come on for this, because especially Phantasm feels like it is kind of like, it was a horror franchise that we'll get into my history a bit later, but like I was aware of the iconography of like the Tall Man and some of this other stuff, but like it's definitely, I would argue, a second tier of the franchises from like this time period, because around the same times like Evil Dead, which I would argue is a higher echelon of the similar thing, and also like the other slashers and stuff.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, and I didn't find Phantasm really early either. I was really into, and still into, like, weird Italian horror and things like that.
Right.
And Phantasm is very much, to me, an American version of that. Like, it is just so bizarre and weird. And I can't, I mean, I don't know how the hell we're going to talk about the plot, because it is so crazy and all over the
I
place.
don't know, it's
But
pretty
that's why
straightforward. It's very much,
so
a
fucking
3-act
great.
structure, beginning, middle, end, totally makes sense.
Mhm. And especially as the series goes forward, it just makes so
All
much
right,
sense.
for sure, yeah, and this definitely fits
Yep.
like Save the Cat, if you want to study how to, like, write the most basic screenplay. This is so the movie to watch,
Yep.
for sure. But yeah, and I know, Brian, this is another, like last episode we talked about Black Sabbath, speaking of Italian horror, and like Black Sabbath and a lot of movies for this particular series, you have not seen it before, the auspice of it being the subject of this episode. You had never seen any Phantasm, and we really weren't aware of it, right?
Yeah, not really. I had seen much of the I had seen the tall man, just kind of pictures of him. I had seen like the metal ball thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't know what the plot of it was. You had told me like a few things, and you had kind of told me about what it was about, not too much. And yeah, they've always been kind of the weirder side of the horror movies around this time, because I was never really into these movies, and I was only able to see the first one, unfortunately. But it is so bizarre, and especially for when this is coming out, it's just so wild. I enjoyed it a lot, I will say.
Right, so we might as well just jump into it. We're going to play the trailer here for Phantasm.
Phantasm. Is it a nightmare? Is it an illusion? Is it an evil? Is it a fantasy? Is it alive? Whatever it is, if this one doesn't scare you, you're already dead. Phantasm.
So yeah, Phantasm, as we mentioned, came out in 1979 from Don Coscarelli, who we should talk about a bit, because this is definitely like the movie that put him on the map. Not his first movie, because he did a couple of smaller movies prior to this. Adam, I'm curious, so you're more familiar with like stuff post-Phantasm, right? Have you seen those earlier two films, the Jimmy, The World's Best, and Kenny and Company? Are you aware of those even?
I'm aware of both. Some documentary I watched somewhere. I kind of talked about them, and I have actually seen Kenny and Company. I watched it with like a group of friends or something where we were sort of hunting through just random shit films, and we watched that along with like Bad News Bears Go to Japan, and
Yeah.
I forget the other one, and it fits right in with there. It's nothing notable, nothing good.
Well, I'll say I did watch both the prior movies.
Big shocker. You went through and watched absolutely everything that relates to the subject material. You've never done that before.
Never done it. No, this is the new thing with the new show. I'm a changed man. So,
Wow.
anyways, but yeah, I watched those two, and I would agree with you more with the first one. I would say is more like what you're describing Kenny and Company as, the Jim, the World's Greatest. It's very much like it's a melodrama movie that's about like a teenager is kind of looking after his younger brother because their drunk, abusive dad, who's played by Angus Scrimm, the tall man. Which, if that's your drunk and abusive dad, that's like another layer. Like, oh, it's already awful, and it's like, oh, it's this tall,
The most
intimidating,
terrifying
dude.
man in the world.
The most terrifying 6'4" man possible. And yeah, so that one's a bit more melodramatic and after school especially. But I kind of liked Kenny and Company. That one's a bit more of like a coming of age dramedy, and I kind of like it's dealing with a lot of the same themes that are familiar to Phantasm, particularly about like a young kid kind of experiencing death for the first time and working through those emotions about it. I think it's not great, but I think it's like a solid stepping stone to Phantasm, especially it takes place around Halloween, and there's like a spooky haunted house sequence that I think is pretty fun. So if nothing else, you can tell even then, like, he made those movies, the first one, when he was like 18. And he managed to sell it to Universal and get a distribution deal. So he was already kind of working with, like, in this indie scene, which a main thing we wanted to talk about with, like, making this our indie is just the fact that, like, we could have done with, like, so many movies from, like, the 90s forward, like, indie horror movies. Dime a dozen. Right. This period, not really. It's so much harder to make a movie in, like, 1979 for $300,000, as is the case with Phantasm.
Yeah, I mean, because I would even make the argument that horror today wouldn't exist without independent horror.
Yeah.
I mean, independent horror is what makes the money now. I mean, look at A24, look at Blumhouse, look at all that. I mean, those are technically independent films. At least as far as budget and things like that. And then there's a lot of darlings. But yeah, back then, I mean, 80s, like late 80s, you really started getting them too with sort of the slasher movement and things like that.
Especially on home video, you got a lot of those released. Like, as opposed to here, home video is in its infancy.
Yeah. No, you didn't. It really didn't exist as far as like real, true, like independent film that gained any sort of traction. I mean, I would argue this and maybe like Texas Chainsaw, of course, but
right.
Other than that, like, yeah, it didn't really happen.
Yeah. So with like Coscarelli, I'm curious because you've seen a lot of his movies. What do you think separates him from the other horror kind of directors that are like a bit more indie?
I think the thing with Coscarelli, which I appreciate, but I think it might be also what stopped him from joining the upper echelon, I guess you could say, or at least having the fame and renown or the sort of, the Wes Craven-esque of it all, is Coscarelli has really bold, crazy ideas.
Yeah.
And he is absolutely 100% committed to trying to get as much of his idea on screen. I don't see a lot of compromise in Coscarelli. As far as this is the movie I want to make, I'm going to try to make it. I mean, as far as like even with like Beastmaster, he basically was halfway fired, halfway walked off set because they wouldn't go as weird as he wanted to go. He's really committed to making these really crazy psychedelic cerebral horror movies. And I think that's his bread and butter, and he doesn't really want to branch away from that. Like, even Bubba Hotep is really fucking weird. Like, it's great. I'd say it's probably his easiest to follow plot-wise. The plot makes no sense, but it's his easiest to follow. But then you watch, like, John Dies at the End, which makes no sense. Or any of the other Phantasm movies, which make fucking even less sense than this one. It's just, I think that's sort of what separates him, but also has hindered him.
And Brian, based on just seeing Phantasm, do you get any sense of that, what Adam's talking about?
Yeah, I mean, like, the choices that this movie, Phantasm, that it makes are so weird. And, like, it for a movie that is kind of coming out of this, early, 70s, 80s horror, it is such an outlier where you look at the stuff, something like Halloween, and it's pretty simple for the most part. It's a killer is after some high school students, or even like Texas Chainsaw, like, like you mentioned, Adam, is also kind of simple of like there's a killer and it's very relatively straightforward. But this is so weird, from like the music choice to like the vibe that this movie has, the sort of weird kind of droning. Yeah, it makes sense that he never kind of broke out in the way that like a Sam Raimi or a John Carpenter did. And also he made what, 4 of these movies, of the Phantasm movies?
Yes, 4 of the 5 total Phantasm. Even though he's like a writer-producer on Ravager, the last one, but he directed the other 4.
Right, yeah, and so it's like, yeah, he seems like a weird guy just based on this one movie. I'd be very interested as someone who, has not seen any of his other movies. I'd be so curious to watch some of them, especially based on what you guys are talking about.
In the annals of horror franchises, for him to do 4 of them, I think he's literally only rivaled by I think Romero's the only one that's beat him as far as directing consecutive films in the horror franchise.
Didn't Wes Craven tied with him then for Scream, right? He did 4 of the 6.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's Coscarelli, Craven, and I think Romero's in the front because he did 6 or 5.
Right.
He did 5 or 6?
No, he did 6.
6.
He did 6 of them, yeah.
Well, he did 3. Yeah.
No, what are you talking about? Everyone loves Diary of the Dead. But I think another thing with Coscarelli that, like, I don't think separates him, because this is the thing I think with Sam Raimi and some of the other people who started in an indie circuit. His movies are very much family productions. Because, like, the big thing with Phantasm is that it's financed by his dad, Dak Coscarelli, and his mother, Kate, did, like, a lot of the makeup and the special effects she was involved heavily in. So there's that, and then, like, all the cast members who appear in most of these movies come back, you know, for, like, the sequels and some of the other Coscarelli, like Reggie Bannister's in every one of his movies and shit like that. There's a real true, like, kind of like family camaraderie thing that's there with, like, a bit, like, Sam Raimi has Ted and a couple of the people like Bruce and other people who've, like, been doing movies with him for so long, but he got so much bigger as opposed to he wanted to kind of keep a tight-knit thing, which is why the only 2 sort of studio movies he did are Beastmaster and then Phantasm 2, right? Pretty much?
Yes. Correct.
Yeah, not Survival Quest, which I also saw, a movie that does not exist, but is so interesting. If you don't know, this is a movie he made that's like, it came out around the same time as Phantasm 2. It's about a survivalist group led by Lance Henriksen, and features amongst the campers young Dermot Mulroney and young Catherine Keener.
Yep.
It's such a weird
I don't know
movie.
that I've ever seen it, but I have seen the trailers for that movie.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've actually seen it, though.
I mean, that's another one that shocked. It's on YouTube. That's how I watched it.
Oh, big shocker. Yeah.
Right. Of course, yes. But yeah, and I think that also kind of comes across, like, Brian, I can't emphasize enough. I watched, like, a lot of interviews with Coscarelli, particularly the documentary Phantasmagoria, which came out around 2005 and goes through the first 4 movies. He's such, like, a sweet Southern California guy.
Really?
Like, he's very just, like, he's the son of, like, his 2 parents are, like, Italian immigrants. And he was, like, he's very much apparently, like, a lot of, like, the Michael character kind of relates to, you know, the Coscarelli guy, A. Michael Baldwin's character.
He's got a really soft, like, sort of tone to his voice.
Yes.
He's really sweet. Like, I think I watched the same one, and he was talking about putting his mom and dad sort of to work. He's like, I just wanted them to be proud of me, you know, and I just thought that. I'm like, this fucking guy, this is the sweetest thing.
Well, especially, like, his great joke also in that documentary talks about, like, my dad was really involved with the production because he wanted to make sure he would make his money back for the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a classic sort of, like, you know, like, you know, not to go on another franchise, but when Robert Englund talked about when he was first going to go meet Wes Craven, he expected, you know, the Prince of Darkness to be sitting in this room, and he walks in, there's, you know, preppy Ralph Lauren wearing erudite Wes Craven. Like, it's these guys who are like
former college professor Wes Craven.
Yeah, these guys who have, like, the sort of most well-balanced and stuff are able to just go into the darkest sort of parts of their minds healthily. So the rest of us are fucked up.
Right, of course, yeah. As you could never tell from this show.
This is
all
my
very
college
sober.
teaching class.
Adam is pulling up his textbook and not a beer.
Yep.
That's exactly.
Let's turn to page 38.
For sure, dude. But yeah, so I'm curious. So Brian, you said you had no idea, no context for Phantasm.
Literally no idea at all.
Without any of that knowledge in starting this movie, what was your journey with seeing Phantasm for the first time?
It's such a weird movie, and it doesn't really... It's a kind of movie that doesn't... It feels like it never settles into, like, a comfortable groove. Like, it's always just kind of like, you know, I mean, the beginning of this is so shocking, which is if I remember correctly, the opening is 2 people having sex, and the woman stabs him with the knife in, like, a cemetery, and nothing in this movie is giving you that sort of comfort of, like, okay, I know where we are, I know what we're kind of doing. It is just throwing all of these ideas at you, and with no real context. I mean, maybe you guys can give me some more kind of info on this, but what the fuck is the ball? Like, what the fuck is it's just a spiky ball?
It's just the ball. In the later movies, it's sort of revealed that a lot of the victims and bodies, he puts their brains in the balls.
Yes.
and sort of they
Hell
become
yeah.
his slaves.
And that's how Jody appears in the later films as well.
Yeah, and Michael's also turning into one. Like, it's very bizarre.
Right.
But let's not forget this sex scene in the beginning. The woman stabs the man with the great mustache, by the way. A lot of good facial hair in this movie.
Yeah,
but
from
then
Tommy is the character. R.I.P.
R.I.P. Tommy, you were a real one. And then she turns into the tall man.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It just starts you off on this, like, you're already just confused and disoriented as to, like, what is this? What's happening? And yeah, and the whole movie is like that, and the music is so, which is my favorite part of this movie, is the music.
Hell
It
yeah.
absolutely rules.
Shout out to Fred Myron and Malcolm Seagrave, who are credited as
Yes.
composers. Amazing.
You can't tell me Goblin didn't hear this score and Argento
Oh, yeah.
didn't hear this score before they did like Suspiria and things like that.
Well, no, they would have had to hear it after, because that's like
Oh, that's
77.
true. Oh yeah, no, that's
I
true.
think-
So you can't tell me
right,
these fuckers didn't hear that score.
Well, I mean, and also like weirdly, it sounds a lot like if you listen to the main theme, it does kind of sound like any sort of like it's very synthy. It's very like sort of almost prog rockish, which is what I've heard a lot of people sort of identify Phantasm as. It's like the prog rock of horror movies, and I think that's very apt.
That's accurate. I like that. I think that's a very apt description.
Yeah, and not even just the music though, just the like oppressive kind of nature and like tone of the movie is feels very psychedelic almost, and gives you that sort of prog rock kind of it's so unique in that way.
Though I will say, what I identified especially this time watching Phantasm was I think there is a base that's sort of there for the reality, but when you like really examine it, it's such a sad base to have your horror movie on, where it's like, all right, our setup is we've got little Mikey, played by A. Michael Baldwin, who's this young man who is spying on a funeral that's going on for his brother Jody, played by Bill Thornberry, his friend Tommy, who died in the opening scene, allegedly from suicide. And Reggie Bannister is also there playing Reggie, very clever naming for him. And from like they're at this funeral, and while they're there, they're right by this like the mortician's house, where is like the all the graves are nearby. Who is the tall man, played by Angus Scrimm, the late great, a true horror icon, Angus Scrimm.
Agree.
And I want to hear immediately after this, Brian, Angus Scrimm first impressions. You gotta like what was it like experiencing him for the first time?
Yeah, he makes such an impression like immediately, because he's so obviously he's tall. He's pretty tall. But
Oh, is he?
also yeah.
They should have indicated that with his name, maybe, that he might have been a tall person.
Yeah, but even just the way he looks, like his face, like he's great, but like he is one of those actors, I feel like, kind of like Robert Englund, or one of those guys who just like, you look at him and you're like, this guy looks like they should be in a horror movie, right? Like they look a bit menacing. They look like they could, kill me right now. It's and even but the tall man as like a character is so interesting, because again, like everything else in this movie, like I said, there's not really a lot of context for him, right? Like Michael Myers has context, and like Freddy has context of like their history and everything. And this he's just he works at the mortician place, and he's just creepy, and that's enough to sort of unsettle you, but also get you really hooked into this. Who the fuck is this guy? Like it's so weird. Yeah.
By the way, I believe the kids are calling it a morgue these days.
A morgue, right? Yeah,
That's what
think
they
of the
call
name.
a mortician's place, I believe. But Adam, I mean, what was your first experience in terms of specifically Scrimm? Like, do you remember the first time you watched this movie and were like, oh my god, this guy freaks me the fuck out?
Yeah, for sure. There's two scenes in particular that always stuck with me and still do. And also, before I even get to those, just another thing Angus Scrimm was able to do, just the control of his face
Yes.
that he had, with the eyebrows, the eyes, the jaw, the jutting the lower jaw out, things like that. I mean, he was just so good at it. But there's two scenes. One is him walking down the street,
Hell yeah.
when Michael sees him from across the street, and just how it slows down the music,
Oh my
and
God.
just how big and thunderous his steps are. But then, of course, the dream sequence where he's above Michael's bed.
Yes.
Michael's sleeping in the cemetery and he's above the bed with his hands on a bedpost. It's absolutely terrifying. You know, for the thing is, his catchphrase as a character is one word. And
Yeah.
it works. As soon as somebody does it in any horror convention, anytime you talk about horror movies, all it takes is someone to go, boy. And you're like, yeah, the tall man, fuck yeah. Like, you know exactly what it is. No, he's one of those things, you know, and I just watched and I hate that I've done it, but I've watched a bunch of those like new stupid tier lists that have come out. And there's one guy I'm in particular that I watched, and he was talking about the tall man. He's like, look, he's like, I understand, you know, he's not as recognizable as Freddy and Jason and all that, but he's like, if you watch the Phantasm movies, he's absolutely the star of the show. I mean, he is the most terrifying thing, and he should be so much more iconic than even he is. And I absolutely agree with that. I think Angus Scrimm's the tall man, which I think they kind of fucked up in, I think it's 4 and giving him a backstory.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need this. Didn't need
Though
this.
I mean, it is interesting. I want to share this with Brian. Brian, in Phantasm 4 Oblivion, there is a point where like Michael is seeing visions of like Civil War era, and it's Angus Scrimm just like on a porch with like, "Oh, would you like some lemonade?"
Yeah. Please don't go. You're the first one that's come through. You're like, oh no, don't no. But he was absolutely terrifying. And I know he did other things. Obviously, if you ask me another movie I've seen Angus Scrimm in,
It's probably a Don Coscarelli movie because he's in Bubba Hotep briefly, and John dies at the end. Yeah,
if it's going to be, yeah. But other than that, I mean, it's one of those performances, one of those characters which, you know, even if he did a million other things, it would still be the most iconic thing he ever did.
yeah.
It's just such that great of a performance.
And he's probably the most consistent thing about all the way to 5, where 5 was obviously, I believe, his last movie, if not one of them. I mean,
I could have finished 5.
yeah.
I had to stop it.
I mean, you know, we're going to talk about the sequels and whatnot later. But I wanted to, in terms of my first experience with Angus Scrimm, it was specifically the scene you were talking about with the bed sort of jump scare. But that was because I watched a special. I shared this with you, Adam, but I've not shared this with Brian. The year is 2004. And
Is it the Bravo thing?
yes, it's the Bravo thing. Bravo channel put out a top 100 scariest horror movie moments list.
101.
Oh, that's right, 101. That's true. Yes.
Which is all on YouTube, baby.
It's all on YouTube. Also, they did a couple spin-offs where it's like even scarier, and some of those other ones that are
all those.
But the 2004 special was a very crucial text in me, like at the peak point of my scaredy catness as a child.
Sure. Yeah.
Seeing that particular special, being horrified, but also very curious, including by this sequence. So I was like, I don't know, like 10, 12 at this point, and I saw like that fucking tall man bed sequence. The kid's sleeping on the bed, and then he just gets dragged apart by 2 little goblin guys that come up. And I was just like, yeah, this is the scariest thing I've ever seen. And then here's a clip from The Wicker Man, and then all these other horror movies that I later would watch. And yeah, I think that's where, because Phantasm was one I watched in high school, but I didn't watch the sequels until right before 5 came out. But I just remember Phantasm was definitely like, was more drawn, like I said, to Evil Dead. But Phantasm was definitely just like, this is weird and interesting. I'm not going to forget this fucking movie. And I haven't. It will stay in your brain like a chrome ball. It just burrows in and drains your blood. And what I would say, like, if I was in a horror movie, it's like, you can pick your method of death. The chrome ball thing is perfect, where it just is thrown over, and then it strikes you in the neck, and you're like, oh God! And then blood just
The
pours out.
drill, like the little drill
Yes.
thing that goes in, is
Right between the eyes.
Right.
Yep, I'm taking that. That's if I'm
And
going
just
out. That's the way I want to go.
I mean, while we're on the ball, like that shot
Hey.
of like the blood squirting out of like the front hole
Yeah.
of the ball is so like striking, and is such a like a that, and the sequence you're talking about with him in the dream sequence is one of those moments where like it just kind of like hooks you, like it just absolutely grabs you. I also wanted to mention another scene that of Angus Scrimm as the tall man that's really like got me is the scene where I believe it's in the where you are, Thomas, in that like very
Oh
creepy
yes,
looking.
my Zoom background is the morgue,
Yes.
where you see
The mausoleum.
the
Yeah.
mausoleum.
Mausoleum.
Yes.
And it's A. Michael Baldwin in the foreground, and all the way in the back.
Yeah, not the mortician's place. It's
No,
the mausoleum.
that's true, right? The proper term. I'm sorry.
Right.
And behind him is the tall man, Angus Scrimm.
Yes, I think it is this scene where like they lock eyes and there's like a long pause and then Michael starts running, and it's so unsettling. It's so creepy to me. It's one of those things that really gets me in horror movies when there's that sort of pause and then like boom, like the chase. That was the moment where I was like, oh, this guy is like really terrifying. Like if I was a child and this man was chasing me down hallways.
Right. It feeds into a very childhood fear, which I think is also like what I was kind of talking about earlier in terms of like the grounding base. I kind of got interrupted for the Angus Scrimm stuff, but the base is like this kid who like, hey, my parents just died and my brother's technically my legal guardian, but he seems kind of tired and he wants to maybe drop me off at my aunt's. And I feel like so much is changing and it's hard for me to like process that. And then on top of those like very relatable things that you and I can agree with, a tall guy in platform shoes is trying to fucking kill you so that he can like make you a part of like our little person army. That's just like so, it's so wild, and the chrome balls are gonna fucking drain your brain out and shit like that. I just love that it has that base that I think anyone can relate to, that kind of sad ennui of like late childhood, only for like also all the surreal shit's happening. It's a real bummer.
Yeah, it's so fascinating that the kind of how it balances those two things of like telling this pretty human story that like it is there. You get like, you know, the way that characters mention the parents dying and passing, it's there, and then you just get like, I don't know, vampire Jawa looking things like the, you know, whatever those things are. And like a thing I do kind of want to bring up, because I keep looking at your Zoom background, Thomas, is like just the look of the morgue.
The mausoleum, yes.
Yeah, the mausoleum. It looks so unsettling with like the marble statues. It reminds me. I know this came afterwards, but it reminds me of the Red Room from like Twin Peaks. You know, I mean the red
There's
curtains
a lot of
and everything.
David Lynchian vibes with this particular, and interesting because it's a contemporary. Because he'd only put out like Eraserhead, pretty much.
Right. Yeah, and I think he's about to make Elephant Man. And yeah, just the look of it, something about the way it is kind of like, because the town is very much like a normal small town in middle America.
Though particularly very Southern Californian.
Right. Yeah. And so having like the mausoleum be this very kind of, you know, it's all marble, it's got the curtains and everything. It's just such a weird kind of contrasting of locations, I think.
And I mean, that's even the case with like the other scene that Adam talked about with, there's a point where Michael Baldwin, after like the initial scary stuff happens with the tall man, right after the funeral, he sees the tall man walking down in his fucking platform shoes, which I love that they just show up like, yeah, we have him in platform shoes, even though Angus Scrimm is like 6'4" at this point. Before he gets older, he has a great, Brian, I would definitely recommend watch Angus Scrimm interviews. He is such a sweetheart of a man based on these interviews. Really? He's like so sincere, especially as he gets older. He's almost like a sweet grandpa. And I was genuinely bummed when he passed away, because he just felt like, Adam mentioned all those things, along with the fact that everything I heard, like just a sweetheart, the grandpa of that family. The reason I hope there's no other Phantasm movies, because I don't think you can do one without Scrimm or maybe Coscarelli. Just it really depends on who's involved.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it should be done. I don't know that, but then you would say, oh, I don't know that there's as much sort of fandom behind it as some of the other things remake. They've remade fucking everything. I mean, they remade April Fool's Day. They remade, House on Sorority Row. So who's to say? I kind of hope not, but...
I mean, you did try to...
Would you be shocked?
You messaged me at some point, though, that you did kind of say, like, if it were to happen, you had a person. Right.
Yeah, and yeah. If it were to happen, the one I chose, I said if it were to happen, I think he would really be sort of interesting as a tall man. I said Michael Shannon.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, fits
I think
that
he'd
vibe.
work.
And the one that I said in response was like, I like that idea. I do. But the one I said was just like, put fucking Gwendolyn Christie in a suit. I think that'd be really fucking cool too. I think she'd genuinely be able to do that. Especially kind of handling some of the things we mentioned about like sort of the gender fluidity, as it were, of the character. I think she would do a great job with that.
Or cast them both and then do the gender fluidity.
Well, that's true. You know? Dual
They are
roles.
both, according to Google, they are both exactly 6'3". So
Yeah.
they are tall.
It
There you
fits.
go.
Yeah. But I'm curious, Brian, who would you pick if not those two? Or like, do you have
Oh,
a
man.
third, if possible?
You know, I'm gonna be honest. Michael Shannon is a really good pick. I might have to co-sign on that because, like, he's got like a similar kind of. I love Michael Shannon. Like, I mean this in the best way. But he has that vibe where you're like, he looks a little creepy. He looks like he could, like, you know, there's a reason why he's played like so many, like, you know, shitty, like, southern, like, redneck kind of guys. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he looks silently unhinged.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so I
I mean,
feel
or
like
even whenever he's talking about something as simple as like the sorority video, the great video of him reading a sorority letter, where he's managing to be that upsetting about something that simple. He can do it with pretty much anything.
And he's got that sort of command over his, like, face, I think, as well, that you were talking about earlier with Angus Scrim. Like,
Yes.
yeah.
But yeah, so I guess we should talk about some of the other people besides Angus, because we've got, we mentioned A. Michael Baldwin a couple times. He's really only done these movies, and like the other Coscarelli movie I mentioned from when he was younger. He was like the best friend in Kenny and Company. But he feels definitely like a kid in this movie. I think it works incredibly well. It feels very authentic. I don't think he aged into being a great actor in the sequels, because he wasn't in 2 famously. It was James LaGrosse in 2.
Right.
And then he was in the other ones afterward.
Yeah, I think his best work is in this one.
Yeah.
You know, obviously as the character. I think he really works. Think about Mike in this movie, like, yeah, he's this paranoid kid that nobody believes, Jody doesn't believe it, but he does like badass shit. Like,
Yes.
he's driving
Yes.
this fucking muscle car. He's shooting shotguns and shooting the windows out of the hearse and jumping out the window. Like, he's a tough little kid, man. He's fully capable. And then when you get to 3 and 4, it just doesn't translate at all. It doesn't work. Like, I'm not saying James LaGrosse was great. I thought he was pretty good, though. Like, LaGrosse did a fine job.
He's fine in that movie. Yeah.
He's fine. He's fine. He's not great, but he's fine. I think he's better than the returning A. Michael Baldwin in 3 and 4, though.
I mean, I think it depends on, like, because 3, I think it's great because he's not in the movie that much. He's at the opening and the close, which I think
Right.
is a help, quite frankly. Because then in 4,
Yes.
he's much more sort of front and center. I mean, I do like at least his stuff in 4 leads to the deleted scenes from this movie to show up, which are cool.
Yes.
Are worth watching the movie.
Yeah, I
for.
agree.
Like, half the runtime is unused footage. From
The hanging scene alone is like,
Yes, which explains to
Fucking
everybody what that is if
awesome.
they don't know, Adam.
they use the car and they hang the tall man from a tree. And they leave him overnight, and he's still alive. He's still talking to Joe or Michael through his dreams and stuff like that. And they go back, and he's gone. That's basically what it is. But it's pretty fucking like gnarly. It's a practical effect. But
Yeah.
it looks like they're hanging a man.
Angus was like on like a rod of some sort that was on the back.
Yeah, it's fucking gnarly, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, you never get to see it, and that's the one thing 4 really did do well. Instead of recycling a lot of the shit you've already seen, like we've all seen those sort of movies or sequels where it's just half of it are flashbacks from shit you already know.
Yeah, a clip show installment. Yeah.
Yeah, basically. And 4 is that, but it's mostly deleted scenes or re-edited or different versions of scenes you've already seen in the first one. So it gives it this a little bit more of an ethereal feel, like, oh, this is familiar, but I don't remember seeing this or seeing this like this. It's really bizarre.
And then, but I think at least with A. Michael Baldwin, he fits that sort of family thing I was talking about earlier, even in the
Yeah.
sequels. That he's like, these movies kind of feel like family reunions for a lot of the people involved, given what I was mentioning
I
earlier
agree.
about Coscarelli. And, you got Reggie Bannister, the actor, who feels like the best fun uncle. He's such a weirdo. as sort of like his personality that he presents, especially to a Michael Baldwin. He's genuinely like at times he's there like silly and cutting up with him, or the fucking scene with him and Jodie playing guitar outside the porch.
Love it.
Love it.
Classic.
Couple of dudes hanging out.
It's just two guys being dudes.
Drinking Dos Equis and
Which,
just jamming out.
Jamming, yep.
Which what I love is that song's written by Billy Thornbury. And the whole thing was that apparently, like, this movie, because we mentioned the thing with Phantasm 4, they shot so much footage for this movie. And there's like another hour and a half of stuff that Don Coscarelli has released either in Phantasm 4 or like at certain bits and pieces. But it was a lot of like apparently Reggie Bannister, who is the ice cream man. He has this ice cream shop, which you see briefly in that scene where the tall man's walking. And inside, we never go inside, but there's apparently like a lot of footage of him performing his songs because he was also a musician. And so it was just like, oh, hey, I'll give Bill his time here, but I got like 3 songs in the movie. Not in the movie at all. But how did you feel about Reggie, Brian?
Yeah, he very much, like you said, is like the fun uncle, where like I love the scene where it's where they find the bug. Like if my memory is hazy of this movie, it's just because of just the rhythms of it and everything. Like, but
it's a fever dream put on screens.
Yeah, and so, but it's the scene where they find the bug and he just shows up and he's like, "Oh, what's going on here?" Like he just shows up. Yeah, he's great, and I do love his little fake death, and he comes back and they're like, "You're not dead," and I was like, "Oh." You know, it even got me where I was like, oh yeah, good thing Reggie's alive. Like I would have been upset if he died, especially the way that, you know, the tall man like stabs him. It's so like violent and yeah, but
and messes up his amazing ice cream man outfit with the vest and everything. It's a genuinely great fit. I'm gonna say it.
It is.
Bring it back, everybody. Do the Reggie Bannister. But how did you feel about him, Adam?
Oh, he's fucking great, dude. He's iconic and classic for a reason. I mean, in this movie, he's, like you said, sort of the fun, cool uncle. You know, here, have a sip of beer, don't tell your mom type of
that
uncle.
kind. I should specify that kind of cool uncle.
Yeah, that uncle. In the later movies, he gets way more sex obsessed.
Yeah.
But he also gets that like quadruple barrel double shotgun. Like it's just. But no, he's fucking great, you know, and he pops up in a lot of stuff too, man. I mean, the last thing I like actively like, holy shit, that's Reggie Bannister. Because I didn't realize when I first watched it, but watched it a couple years ago. He's the pharmacist in the first Wishmaster movie.
Yep. Hold on, pause. Do you know what Wishmaster is?
I feel like I've heard it mentioned in passing, but I have
probably
no
by
idea.
me talking to you.
Well, get ready because you better fucking watch it. No, Wishmaster is great. The first one. The rest are.
I saw the poster for Wishmaster. This thing is. I already want to watch this.
It's rules. It's bad. You gotta watch it.
But yeah, I mean, he's also in like what was it, Silent Night, Deadly Night 4, in Bubba Hotep. Just in like he's definitely one of those guys who like shows up in random, very B-level horror movies at this point.
And the character is not a character that we should follow for the next 4 movies. It should be just Michael or, you know, whatever. But no, we're going to follow Reggie, the ice cream truck driver, who's kind of this weird dude who's letting this kid go on his ice cream routes with him. Like, why is he? What is the? He's just a fucking weird dude, man. And you follow him, and it totally works with the sort of strangeness of this movie. And these movies, period. Like Reggie is our main guy. He's
in a similar camp to like Ash Williams in terms of like, this guy's a fucking bumbling buffoon. Why are we following him on this journey?
He's a moron. Yeah, he is a moron. Like Reggie is an idiot.
Except in terms of getting rid of fucking spheres. He manages to get rid of a bunch of them. That's his one skill.
He can do that. And kill like zombie little people and zombie cops and shit like that, but no luck with the ladies though, Reggie. Not for his lack of fucking trying.
No, yeah, I think
Jesus.
In terms of that sequel stuff, I agree. I think especially 2, and 4. 4, it like has nothing to do with anything, but 3, I would at least say he has that lecherousness, but he's offset by the underrated queen of 90s horror, as far as I'm concerned, Rocky.
Oh, she was
so
badass.
fucking great. Brian, this is the lady who's introduced in 3 and has nunchucks.
Right, yes, he told me about this.
She nunchucks a sphere out of the fucking sky, man.
Yep, she does that.
Like,
it's
she
great.
doesn't give a shit.
3, I would say, is my favorite of the sequels, Adam. I think at this point. I think it's like fits perfectly in terms of the track record is like 2 comes out in 88 and it's a big studio Universal movie. About big, I mean $3 million. As big as like a budget for a Coscarelli movie ever got. But then 3 goes straight to video, basically. It was going to go to theaters and they dumped it. Yeah. And then 4 was straight to video. And then 5 is 2016. And it's rough. But yeah.
No, I definitely agree. I go 1, 3, 2, 4, and then probably 5. Yeah, no, 3 is great. But yeah, no, just the whole cast in this. Even Jodie. And again, talk about Michael Baldwin's best performance was in this one. So was Bill Thornburg's best performance.
I think way more, quite frankly, because I would say Baldwin has a better track record than any time he comes back, because he's not in 2, because he dies at the end of this movie. No. Spoilers for this movie from 1974.
Yep.
And he is not in that one, but he shows up in 3, and then 4 and 5, and he seems like a very nice man from the interviews, and everyone is.
I'm sure he's a sweet man.
Yes. He's so wooden in all his other movies, particularly
It's
5.
really bad.
So
it almost feels like a choice.
Yeah.
You know, like, you're supposed to be a spirit. But the thing is, too, not to slight another man on his looks or anything like that. He has aged so noticeably.
Yeah.
From 1 to 3, and he's not supposed to have aged.
Yes, because he dies here, so he should be very close to what he was at, like, how old was he? Like, what, 24 maybe in this movie?
At best. Yeah, at best. Doesn't work. It's like if you had, made a live action of Detroit Rock City Kiss album when it came out and then filmed it today with Gene Simmons now. Like, same guy. No,
but I mean, I would argue at least like with Reggie Bannister and then Michael Baldwin, they aged in interesting ways. Like Reggie looks much older, but still vaguely the same in terms of his style and everything. And
they did him a disservice by doing the bad dye jobs. I think if they wouldn't have done the dye jobs on Reggie, it would have felt more natural and worked.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But especially like, by the way, Brian, the first 5 minutes of 2 is like immediately after the events of this movie, like taking place at the same time. So you have like a dummy guy in frame, Michael Baldwin, and then Reggie still like, I'm playing the guitar in front of the fireplace just like I was 5 minutes ago, aka 9 years ago. But yeah, it's interesting. They kind of like how it is basically like Phantasm takes place both over several decades, but also over a week at certain points, depending on the movie.
Yeah. Yep. I'd say maybe a month.
Yeah.
Yeah, because James LaGrosse is also supposed to be like 18.
Right.
In Phantasm too.
Yeah.
Horse shit.
Right.
Yeah. Fuck you.
But anyway, yeah. So back to the original Phantasm. I think a big thing we need to talk about is just the fact that, like I mentioned, $300,000 budget. This movie was done on shoestrings, but there's such a charm to it that you can't really recreate, especially like, I think Phantasm is so indie, but also it's very much like homemade, homespun by this family kind of thing. Like the other actors who were in this were in Kenny and Company, including, we should mention, Adam, you're here. Talk about the scene with the box, because I think that might relate to something you enjoy quite a bit with Hands and Fear.
It is 100% the scene from Dune. I mean, it absolutely is. This old, like, mystical woman, put your hand in the box. What's in it? Just put your hand in the box. It hurts. pain is the mind killer. But like, what?
They don't say
Wait a
mind
minute.
killer.
What the fuck?
They say
Now,
like
look.
fear is the
that's
killer.
true.
They just like they get rid of a word. I think Brian, you pointed that out. They get rid of one word for copyright purposes.
Yep, exactly. Now, if fucking Michael to start developing like Kwisatz Haderach powers and become the Mahdi,
I mean, he kind
this shit would
of
have been wild. But then at the
that-
same point, kind of happens.
yeah, exactly. Yes, it does totally.
Kinda does.
It by 4 basically. Brian is like he's in the desert.
He's the Muad'Dib.
And he's in the desert, and then he sees the tall man, and it's just like, you need to come to me, boy. And it's like,
He's got different colored eyes.
Right, different colored eyes. Because,
Oh my
yeah,
God.
at the end of 3, he has like chrome
eyes.
golden color eyes.
Yep. And he's doing like a vision quest type thing in the desert.
Yep.
And he's literally traversing through time, going backwards and forwards through time.
Right, only his coyote, voiced by Johnny Cash from the Simpsons episode, is the tall man.
Right. Just as good. Just as good.
Honestly.
I was really, I was really surprised that like it is just straight up from Dune.
Yeah.
And obviously this is like what 5 years before the David Lynch Dune.
Yeah, and only like
Yeah,
15
roughly.
after it was originally published, so fairly new in its run.
Yeah, but by the time 15 years after that book came out, it had already been like getting the classic status.
Yes.
Right.
So everybody had fucking read it already.
I love that scene though because it is so, and it's very early on in the movie, so I didn't know where it was heading, and just the weirdness of that scene. There's just the trial with the box, and like the fact that she is dressed like I
The Bene
recently
Gesserits, yeah.
yeah, I recently started reading the book of Dune, and the description is very much like like she appears in the movie, and but the weirdness of that scene when he leaves and the old woman starts like chuckling. It's just
Yeah.
so.
And then the girl just dies, right?
Yeah, the girl goes to the mausoleum. She goes to like that door with the 4 like heads above it, and then she just like you hear a scream and it cuts
And then that's it.
and it's
that's it.
Yeah,
I love it.
the rhythm of this movie is just so unique and so weird. Where that happens and you're like, oh, we're not gonna linger on that. We're not gonna explain like how she died. We're just nope, she's dead, and that's
Yes.
Like Michael's not bummed out about it. We don't ever see the grandma again. Nothing. Okay, all right.
Well, I mean, we do see the grandma again technically in Phantasm 4, Oblivion, where she kind of shows up as the tall man's wife, basically, I think is the implication.
Yeah, exactly. And then she's also like he sees visions of her when he's driving the hearse. Like she's sitting next to him cackling.
Yep.
The fuck, man. Like that's the thing. Like, all right. So watching this movie, I agree with you. Said it earlier, Brian. Like, there's moments that just hook you, and they hook you in a way like this is really fucking cool when I'm watching. Like even these practical effects, like with the ball and stuff. But I don't think that's why it necessarily hooks me. It more or less hooks me in the way of like, what the fuck am I watching?
yeah.
Like, what the fuck is this? Where is this going to go? What is going to happen here? And I don't think that question, even across the 4 movies, and I can't speak on the 5th. Like I said, I tried to watch it. It was really late at night, so I shut it off and I never went back to it. But I don't know if the question is ever answered, really. Because the explanation changes in ways from movie to movie.
Yeah.
Like, the 3rd one, he's some, like, alien, they're saying the tall man is.
I mean, they kind of imply
And
that with this
it's-
movie. I would argue that he's like interdimensional and is like going from
Yeah,
place to place.
but the 3rd one, they really like. I mean, I even think in the 2nd or 3rd one, they call him an alien. Like someone's like, he's an alien, blah blah. And then the 4th one, like, nah, he's just this old Civil War scientist who somehow hopped dimensions and came back changed.
Well, I
and
think
now he does
my
this,
interpretation of that is that he is like the tall man that we sort of see is like that guy Jebediah, what's his fucking face from 4, but he's possessed by this alien creature, like his visage has been consumed. I think that's also the case with like
so
Kathy
they're
Lester.
stargating us.
And so, I mean, you know what? Fair. They have the most primitive Stargate possible, which is great, too. Speaking to the low budgetness.
Yeah, just 2 tuning forks. Yeah.
They're like about at like waist height.
Yeah, they look like they had velvet ropes. If they had one velvet rope, people would just stand
You can't come into the inner dimension. Okay, let me you two in.
Yeah, you on the list. No, but my friend Mr. Jackson is.
I'm curious, Brian, how did you feel when we got to like that sort of sci-fi territory?
Oh my god, that room is where like I like really was like falling in love with the movie. That scene is so like once we enter that room, my ears perked up, like my eyebrows. I was like, oh, what the fuck is this room? Like this room is giving off some very interesting vibes right now. And
Brian vibes, quite frankly. That's the thing. Is like when I pitched this to you, I told you some things, and I was just like, I think you'll like it because it's the prog rock of horror and all this other stuff I've been mentioning. And was I accurate? Does that feel accurate for at least like the second half of this movie, basically?
Oh
you?
yeah,
It's just
the second half is where it's
unhinged
it's
shit.
Yeah. Oh my god, Thomas, let me tell you. When they cut to like when he actually goes into the portal and you like see what it looks like, leaning back in my chair, just fully like, oh my god, this is so cool. I love it. Isn't explained. I mean, like you guys are talking about the sort of the stuff that they bring in the sequels and everything, but like just based off this movie, like nothing is explained.
I will briefly interrupt and say I do think there is about 2 lines of explanation during the sequence where like they go through the portal briefly, and there's that great shot of A. Michael Baldwin in like the red abyss.
Hell yes.
Where he's just like floating in this red abyss, and then he comes back up and he's just like, oh, I think he's shrunk the corpses and made them into these like Jawa minions that we're referring to, who you don't see their faces because that would be too expensive for them to be able to do that. But they do in the sequels, by the way, Brian, and they have varying interesting designs. I'll just say.
Okay.
But I think, yeah, like he gives that explanation, just like they're shrinking the bodies. That's what these Jawa creatures are, and they're taking back these fucking Breaking Bad tubs that you would like dispose of a body in sulfuric acid or whatever.
Yes.
Like one of those drums are just like, oh, they're more souls that we can take back, basically. To our world to like feed us and power us and whatever.
Even that, like the way you explain that and everything, it is not given that much sort of, you know, they don't focus on it that much. They give
it's just a line and then they fuck off and do weird shit.
But that is the type of stuff I love so much in like, you know, this type of, you know, sci-fi horror kind of thing of like, we'll explain it in the vaguest way possible. You can put your own interpretation on it or not. You can just go with it and just kind of like, you know, whatever. And I love it. I think it's just so incredible. I love that room. I love the scene where like all the lights go out and he has the little lighter, like.
Or it's particularly the scene where like he goes into the dark room and then the tall man opens the door by blowing it away, and he's bathed in blue light, and it's just like, hello, boy. It's so good.
Yeah, it's great, and I love the design of like, I mean they're basically Jawas, but like, I do love the way they look and the way they move, and I love that shot of the, like I mentioned, their world, their universe, whatever that is. It's just so insane.
By the way, do you get now, to call back to an episode from last season, to remember Van Helsing and Dracula's minions?
I was gonna say we're covering a lot of Jawa minions on this podcast.
That's yes, I think that'll be the recurring thing in every season. We'll have Jawa Tuck. This Jawa's side.
Thomas's fetishes are coming out.
Finally, I can express myself.
It's the hoods.
It's so odd, and I think that's the thing where, like, in a Van Helsing, a movie that costs so much more money, relatively to this fucking movie, and it's just like they have these Jawas, but there's no like creativity to them. They're just like these minions of a weird Dracula who's way more interesting as a villain. Versus this movie where like it's already weird enough we have the tall man and his minions are literally just like little people. Just the juxtaposition, like calling him. If we called him the little guy, Angus Scrim, that was his name.
It would be a lot scarier if it was a little man, but like the Jawas were tall.
But with the
like,
proportions of like the tall man, but with the proportions of a Jawa.
Yeah, I think that would be very scary. But
So it just looks like the two kids like trying to get into a movie theater wearing a raincoat.
I love Angus Scrimm's work on BoJack Horseman. All 5 seasons of it, I guess. But yeah, I think like to go back at least to like the sort of the lower budgetness of it. I love the fact that when you just look up stuff about this movie and you see so much, it's just like Coscarelli was inspired by Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes, which makes so much sense. The tall man is basically fucking like Jonathan Pryce in that movie. And it feels like that's why it kind of works as think as sort of a gateway horror movie in terms of like, it is scary, but it's not gory. It's just weird and nightmarish. And I think like when I was 12 and I ended up like seeing that clip, it kind of like really dug into like, oh, I'm almost out of like my childhood. And look at this like 13-year-old kid who has to deal with the tall man. Is this what my teenagehood will be? And I think that's what's so fascinating. I think like it's very. Would you agree, Adam, that maybe this would work especially for like that kind of age range?
For like 13?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I slightly disagree with the gore. I think there is plenty of gore in here. I think just most of it is yellow blood.
Yes.
But I think if that was crimson colored, this movie would have a whole nother reputation. I mean, you do get the one scene of the blood shooting out the back of the ball, which, by the way, in part 2, I don't know if you noticed when they do that again, they heavily edit it. They barely show it happen. Like they show the ball hit and then barely anything.
It's a different time because that's like MPAA, like really fucking was shit.
And you could tell like their fingers were on the pulse of that. But yeah, I think so. I think this is not necessarily one to get, how do I put this? Not necessarily one to get people into horror or like get kids, younger kids, preteens.
Like a second tier, I would argue. Like you have the introductory.
Yeah,
and it's like,
I think this would be like, hey, dude, check this movie out. It's called Black Christmas.
Yeah.
Fucking great birth of slasher genre, all that. Now watch this fucking thing.
Yeah.
And then you're going to see where a lot of other shit maybe found influence that you're going to see for 30 years on and see like, oh, these people liked Phantasm and these people liked this.
A famous one we should mention, by the way, J.J. Abrams is a big
loves
fan.
it. He single-handedly paid for the new restoration.
Yeah, I was really confused by the Bad Robot logo at the beginning, and I was like, oh yeah,
he paid for the 4K. Yeah.
And I mean, and also you can tell from like speaking of Gwendolyn Christie again, Captain Phasma is like inspired by he saw that Chrome design and was like, oh, it's like Phantasm. So that's how
and
we
then
got
Phasma, right? Yeah, exactly. I think if you wanted to show somebody like the era of horror that was birthed from the 70s and 80s, I think it would be Black Christmas, this, and maybe Halloween. If not, maybe Nightmare on Elm Street, or if you want to go crazy Italian, go like Suspiria or something like that. But I think this is definitely one of those that would fit for that age range. The fun thing I think about Phantasm is there'd be so many questions and there'd be so much talk after watching it with somebody who has no idea what it is.
Yeah.
Especially somebody younger, and you have no way to answer them.
Kind of like what we're doing now with Bryan, basically.
Yeah, it would just be debate and be like, what do you think it meant? I have no fucking clue, but it was weird.
But Bryan, so like, what about you in terms of like your horror journey? You've mentioned you're a scaredy cat. If you were shown this at like 13, would you have loved it? Or how do you think you would have felt?
Yeah, because around 13, I think I was in my peak of like, I'm scared of everything. Like if I see a horror movie trailer on TV, I'm like, but yeah, I mean, it is weird. Like, Adam, you mentioned like the gore is there, like, the ball and the mustard blood, but unlike something like Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like, I think this movie is much more focused on tone. Texas Chainsaw and Halloween has like, they have a tone as well, but it's very different from this.
I mean, well, quite frankly, it's just that Halloween is more commercially viable as a film.
Exactly.
On plainest paper possible. Just babysitter gets stalked by a killer. And then this movie, you have to explain so much more.
Yeah, but I get what he's saying. He's saying that the scares in this movie rely on the tone of the film.
Right.
It's this sort of just general unnervedness and not knowing what the fuck that happens is what propels this movie to be scary.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And so, like, but I also feel like it almost is, because watching this yesterday, when I watched it, I was kind of like, I have no idea what, like, even to think about that. I was a bit like nervous to do this today because I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna talk about with this movie because it
Right.
how do you even
Nobody knows what the fuck
yeah,
we're gonna
how do
say.
you begin? And so I'm kind of like, it was a bit comforting to hear you guys just be like, I don't fucking know what this thing is either.
Right.
And like, but I almost feel like that could be a bit off-putting for some people where it's like, Halloween is pretty straightforward and everything, like we mentioned earlier, and like, but I think it would be a really interesting movie for someone who is looking for, again, a horror that isn't, like you said, kind of commercially viable. Like, this is not a movie that's, marketable or in a lot of ways. It's very weird, and I think it would be a really great gateway into kind of weirder horror for a lot of people.
I agree. I always stood by, like, as far as like horror movies go, because I love all different genres of horror.
Oh, Adam, are you a fan? I wasn't aware.
Time. But I always look at it like this: if I'm trying to recommend somebody a horror movie who's not necessarily into horror, if I can't sum it up in like 2 to 3 sentences what the movie is, I don't recommend it typically.
Gotcha.
I just don't, because it's like I don't think because. There's certain people you'd be like, it's fucking weird. It makes no sense. I think you're going to love it. And those type of people would be like, all right, fuck it.
Yeah.
But if it's someone who's new getting into horror, especially maybe at an older age, I just like tend to be like, I would recommend ones that might be similar and see how they go before I go to something like this.
Right. I mean, I'm just more making the Halloween comparison just because it's part of a key sort of evolution in horror where like this movie, as I mentioned, cost $300,000 to make. Made $22 million in 79 money. That's amazing. Yeah. That is a genuine, like, massive return on your investment. And feels like so truly indie. I think also because, like, Phantasm works so well on film. Like, that's the big distinction where this movie is clearly shot on the cheapest film they could afford, but that adds the surreal quality of, like, especially any night scene.
And every penny is there, too, man.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's the one thing.
Even like the chrome balls and the weird way they made that, where it's like they had a fastball pitcher throwing it, and then they just reversed the footage for like any scene in the hallway. Where it just goes like,
it's fucking wild.
That's so clever. Yeah. And even like what I will say though, like not to bring back the Halloween comparison, but like you mentioned that the night sequences and like it's so like isolated at night. Probably because they didn't have like a bunch of extras similar to Halloween, and it works in the benefit of the movie where it adds to the creepiness factor of it. And it's that sort of thing of like, because they don't have a lot of money and it's very scrappy, a lot of those things work in the favor of the movie where like, I mean, the nighttime sequences, especially the way that they're shot and lit, are so like striking and like looks like that kind of cheap film that you would have to get on your own because you're not getting it from a studio or anything. So
and you don't have like a phone and that can shoot the footage for you.
Right.
That's the big thing where like you can have movies shot on iPhones. So back at this time, you had to rent this equipment, you had to buy this film stock, you had to go through so much shit to get your movie even watchable, let alone like distributed everywhere. After that point, no YouTube to upload Phantasm 4K full movie necessarily.
You can't upload it on Twitter.
Right, stream it on Twitch, whatever.
High quality, win real slots.
So, in terms of this movie, we've covered a lot of ground. I'm curious, Brian, is there anything we haven't talked about with Phantasm you wanted to shout out? Just like a detail you noticed, or just something really interesting, some weird thing we didn't talk about yet?
Oh man, I mean, I love the car chase sequence towards the end of the film where they like no one's driving that thing. Like it's so great and it's shot really well.
I want to tell you, Brian, each one of them has some kind of car explosion like that.
Cool.
It's the best part of any of those movies.
And man, they get way more preposterous too.
Oh, the one in 4 is amazing though. It's so fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, it's really, and I mean, it's just like it barely touches anything. It's so fucking great.
It's so good. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. I love their like plan to sort of trap him, because I love the sort of what you guys mentioned, like the deleted scene where they hang him. Like that sounds insane, but like the fact that they are trapping him in a giant like well, basically.
Yes.
And that's like their plan is so crazy to me. And yeah, just the whole sort of last half, that last leg of the movie really is so just breakneck and is moving like so quickly.
Did this viewing make you interested in seeing the rest of the franchise?
Yeah, I had planned to, and then I didn't, because
I told him if he could to watch the first 3. I think if you could, that would have been.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely 1 and 2. I mean, 3 just because of how fun it is, but I think 1 and 2 are perfect sort of. This is this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say I think 2 kind of went down in my estimation when I rewatched it recently, just because it feels a lot more studio heavy, and I think
right, but I think that's the important nature of it.
Yeah,
to where you get 1 where there is no studio involvement, you get 2 that's got this crazy ass idea, and then you see what a studio thinks and does to it.
Right,
where it's like it's so different to each other, yet there's still enough similarities.
And 3 is very much an Army of Darkness toned, like kind of horror comedy. And then he trailed back a lot on that with 4.
4 is got to be next to 5 the lowest of the budget. It's got to be.
Yeah, because I mean it's direct to video, but also it does look like it's shot on like what? It looks like it's shot on film still, right? Or not?
Maybe, if not really early digital.
Right.
Like,
same thing with 3. 3 is very much like it's direct to video sort of budget. It's much lower than 2 was.
Yeah, but 3's got a lot more charm to it, where 4 feels like a weird fever dream that doesn't necessarily connect ever.
And then I want to mention about Ravager, because I watched all of Ravager. This is my second time seeing Ravager. I've seen it twice the whole way through, and I think it is easily the worst of the franchise, man, because David Hartman is the director, not Don Coscarelli. By the way, looked at his IMDb. This David Hartman. He also directed a bunch of Winnie the Pooh animated specials from like the 2000s to the 2010s, and also
perfect guy for Phantasm.
The recent Transformers animated series as well. So yes, Phantasm, wonderful, perfect.
Right.
But
tracks.
It's so weird. It's just basically like it is the compromised version of what Roger Avery kind of pitched, which that's an interesting detail. Is that Roger Avery, right out of winning the Oscar for Pulp Fiction, was like, Don Coscarelli, I want to do the ultimate budget finale Phantasm movie.
But think about that. Even just saying what you said, there are some huge fans of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Huge, big star fans. And I mean, that's fucking crazy. You don't get that a lot. I mean, you get that with, Night of the Living Dead, I would say would be one of them. Maybe the first Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw. But other than that, I mean, those are like the ones a lot of people really kind of reference, like, oh, blew my mind. But Phantasm, to be in that echelon, it's fucking crazy.
Yeah. But then 5 is definitely like, it's basically like the most depressing family reunion you've ever seen.
It looks like a fan film.
Yes. I think, and it's shot digitally, which is a big problem versus the film we were talking about earlier. And I think, what was it? Like, the Reggie stuff in the desert was like originally for a web series, right? I've heard that's the thing.
I think it was originally, that's how it was constructed.
Yes.
Into a web series, and then once ultimately what happened with Scrim, I feel like they quickly rushed and forged it all together and put it out.
Yeah.
As a feature.
It's just like, all that's going on where like basically the post-apocalypse is going to happen finally. And we see it unveiled in horrible CG for this very low-budget film. That's really atrocious. But then the sort of real-world story is Reggie thinks he's in like a old folks home, and Michael Baldwin's like, hey, I'm your emergency contact. You have dementia.
Kind of a cool idea.
Right. I think that's the most interesting stuff in the movie is any of those scenes where it just feels like, oh man, this is like what this actually ended up being, and this is a bummer, and it's sad. And then the moment they go to any of the post-apocalyptic stuff, it sucks. It's so bad. It feels low budget, but in a sort of asylum-y way.
Yeah, the skyscraper-sized sphere
Right.
is so dumb looking. I mean, cool idea, but it just looks so dumb.
Yeah. I'm curious, Brian, based on all the tidbits we've told you about the sequels, if you were going to dive into them, how deep would you go?
Oh man, I mean, I would do definitely the first 4, and then I would have real trepidations about the 5th one. But I almost feel like I would have to watch it just out of like a completionist like sake, just to like watch all of them. Which I'm certainly interested in, and I'll probably be doing that soon. But
For spooky season. I mean,
Yes,
it's right around the
Don't
corner.
they even bring Rocky back in Ravager?
Oh, good lord. Yeah, that's... This is my biggest grievance with the entire franchise.
I knew it.
Yep,
knew it.
I know.
knew it.
I hated it the first time I saw it. I hate it now. Spoilers, everybody, for Ravager. They have a mid-credit scene, Brian, where they bring back Rocky because she wasn't in 4. She was great in 3.
Rocky's the girl with the nunchucks from
Yes.
part 3.
okay, of course.
Yes. And she comes back in a post-credit scene, or mid-credit scene, where there's this, like, little person dude who's part of, like, the post-apocalypse team, and his arm's been blown off, and then he, like, is like, hey, can I get a ride? Like, can you give me a piggyback ride? And then he, like, cops a feel on her. And that's how he brought back this great fucking female character who ruled so hard in 3 and didn't take sexual harassment from Reggie, which is a great scene in that movie.
No, it's great, and it happens twice actually,
Yes.
because he's very persistent.
Yeah.
But oh god, ugh.
Fuck that shit. That's like the last scene of Phantasm, goddamn. So yeah, enjoy the series, Brian. I hope you love it.
Thank you.
and
Yes,
get to that end.
that part really. I'll be honest. That might make me go back on watching the 5th one, but we'll see.
Okay. Well, Adam, what about you? Is there anything we haven't mentioned yet about Phantasm you want to shout out?
You know, the thing is, as we were talking about earlier, and I kind of just want to dive back into it real quickly again. It's just how fucking good Angus Scrimm is in these movies. Even when he's playing the sort of Civil War, like bumbling, "Ooh, I have some lemonade," and like he's putting his all into it. Like even when at the end of his, life, when his health was really poor in 4 and especially 5, he was still giving it his fucking all. Like even when he had aged so noticeably between 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, he was still imposing. He was still scary. He still had that voice and the cadence. Deserves a spot with some of the best of the sort of horror villains and horror icons. I don't think he'll ever get that. I think he has it with horror fans, but as far as like mainstream audiences, I don't think you're ever going to see a version of the dogs playing poker scene with horror icons, and fucking the tall man's one of them.
No, right. The dumb thing I have like on a shirt now that has like
Yeah,
Chucky
you right.
and
Yeah,
Pinhead.
you get it every year.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I have something in this house. We have parties, love Fridays, love family, dream big, and do puzzles. And it's like Pennywise, Jason, Michael Myers, Freddy, and Pinhead. You're not going to see fucking the tall man on there. You know what I'm saying?
No.
He should be right along there with, the best of them. This would not work today. Phantasm, I don't think a remake would work. The only way Phantasm I would think would work is in like a series. I could see that. I'm not saying a full series, like where you do seasons, but I'm saying like a mini series, like how they redid The Stand as a mini series, which didn't work. But what I'm saying, you do those 3 to 6 part things, and then that's it.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, but at the same time, I don't want any more series based on movies like that. I don't want any.
I don't want any more Phantasm. Truly, I don't.
Yes.
I love Phantasm as it is. I don't need any more.
No, I would concur with that. But I mean, I'll just say one other thing we haven't talked about yet. Just a specific thing. We mentioned this scene where he's like walking down, but the second half of that scene where he's in front of Reggie's ice cream, and the fucking ice is just like breaking down, like, oh, he's putting stuff in or whatever, and the tall man is just like sniffing it and just going wild because he has the whole like aversion to cold. Just like, ugh. I can't handle it. Just there, it's like our only hint to his weakness, which will later become a major thing in the sequels, especially.
Yeah, which that's the only hint in the whole movie. They don't ever use it against him in the first one.
No. Except there was footage cut. I did see some clips of like him using the fire extinguisher.
Yeah, I saw that too. Yeah, yes. Yeah. But then it's like in the third movie, I think. Yeah, the third movie, like, he hates cold. And they have like a whole cryogenesis like chamber and all. Like, what the fuck?
And he goes into he's like harpooned into a meat locker, basically.
Yeah, Rocky fucking spears his ass.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Rocky, my favorite
Rocky's
character.
Shit. Yeah, I need more Rocky.
Yes.
He's a badass motherfucker, man. That flat top.
Well, we've had so many, and then Creed's already happened, so you know.
Yeah, hey.
A lot of Rocky.
Brian, you know who Grace Jones is?
Yes, yeah.
So think Grace Jones, but less sort of crazy and with nunchucks. And he got Rocky.
Sounds so
But
cool.
a similar confidence and attitude. That's, I think, the big
similar confidence, same haircut, everything.
Hell yeah.
Yes. But yeah, so I guess we'll wrap things up on Phantasm here. And I guess just final thoughts, Adam, on this landmark film, this landmark indie horror film, Phantasm.
As a complete package, there's nothing like Phantasm, or even its sort of franchise as a whole. Love it or hate some of the entries or choices they make, it's still its own fucking entity. It all belongs in itself. It's fucking crazy. It's something that if you even as a listener listen to us talking tonight and we're able to glean a plot out of it, you're fucking smarter than I ever will be. It's fucking crazy. It's chaos. It's nightmare, fever dream fuel, through and through. And I think that's sort of why it has staying power, especially with sort of, and I hate to say this, I don't want to be pretentious, but people who might be more film minded or love film or appreciative of sort of weird narrative, because this movie, for all intents and purposes, should not work in any way, shape, or form. And yet there's so much care and love given to the sort of creation of this movie that through that, I'd say that's the glue that made it bind and made it work. There is no sort of direct plot you can follow, and yet somehow you're hooked through the whole thing and you want to know where it's going. You never get that answer, and it's one of the few times I've ever watched a movie where there's sort of no resolve that I don't really care. I love it for that. And yeah, Phantasm is just unlike anything else, really.
Very true. Bryan, your final thoughts on Phantasm with your first time.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this movie a lot. Like I've been saying, I love the vibe that this movie has, and just its rhythm is so weird and so unlike, like you said, Adam, like unlike anything else. And I think influential in some ways. I mean, like someone I thought of while I was like watching this was like a director like Panos Cosmatos, like the guy who made
yes.
Mandy, of course. Like I think very much influenced by this movie and sort of the music of it, the everything about it. And I just think it's so weird. It's just so much weirder than I was expecting for a horror film from this time. It just makes so many weird choices. I love a lot of the production design and just the way that it's not interested in answering any of your questions. And, much as the sequels might go into that, of course, but it is just a movie showing you some weird, wacky, crazy shit, and it comes together and it works. It's a very unique type of horror movie.
But yeah, so Phantasm, my final thoughts, honestly, I think I agree with what everyone said here. It's so unique, it's so odd. There's so much crazy shit we haven't even talked about in this movie in detail as we're getting here to the final thoughts, but stuff like when you see the images of the tall man from a different past time and it's like starts moving, or Jodie's sex scene almost with the lady in lavender, which happens in the middle of the cemetery, and it's this weird moment where the movie becomes a sex comedy all of a sudden. definitely would not have like a mainstream appeal, but at the same time is like a great sort of B tier franchise of horror. I would argue pretty more consistent than a lot of other franchises in terms of, even with 5, which I would say is bad, but is like interesting in terms of just like what it is meta contextually. It's just like the last time we're probably going to see all these people together, literally, because Scrim's gone.
And does that, in all honesty, I don't mean to step on your fun things, but does that make it maybe a little bit easier to watch, that this is the last one?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because nothing else, Brian, I would recommend you see it just for, like, it's Angus Scrimm's last time being the Tall Man.
Right.
Which you could also watch some of the other things, which we never mentioned this, but there's a bunch of different places where he reprised the role of the Tall Man, like for Adult Swim bumpers at one point for a Halloween marathon. And then, like, in commercials for like Fangoria magazine. That's a great one.
Right.
That I just saw on YouTube. Which is like, boy, you should subscribe to Fangoria. It's so good. But I just think, like, it is such definitely a cult appreciated franchise. Like, I've only seen, of my various times going to Dragon Con, I saw one person dress as the Tall Man. And it was maybe my favorite fucking one of, like, that particular Dragon Con. Because it's such a specific, nerdy thing that is so great to see just walking around in our existence. The Tall Man is here. I love that kind of, like, weird, surreal DIY spirit that kind of fits with, like, the cosplaying angle of it. It's not that different from, like, especially, I love hearing that they had 1 suit for this movie versus 3 for 2. That's the budget upgrades. We have 2 copies of it.
That, like you said, like, there's not a lot of people who know this movie necessarily, who are more kind of the general public, but I do feel like there are a lot of people who have maybe seen the Tall Man, like you said, in various other places, or just have seen the image, but just have never really, like, checked out where, like, the original, like, I almost kind of like, and this is another franchise that I have zero history with, and I know you have a lot of history with, is like the Hellraiser franchise, where, like, I know I don't want to open that.
The lament configuration.
but almost kind of like that, where, like, people know the image of, like, the Pinhead, right? That's the name of the.
Oh, you mother! Look,
Lead Cenobite, I believe, is his proper name.
Okay.
Oh, Hell Priest.
Hell Priest, or that too.
Yeah. But I feel like a lot of people, know, like, the image of that, but have never seen the original source of that, which I think is very interesting.
Or, I mean, if you have, you've seen the original one, and probably 2, but that's it.
Sure, right.
Yeah, and that's fair. And that's completely fair. I'm a Hellraiser, God, purist and fanatic, just for the worst reasons. I mean, they're not good movies. But yeah, I can understand, like, people like seeing 1. All right, where is this going to go? 2? Oh, hey, okay. And then 3. Oh, what
the CD Cenobite and shit like that.
No, the camera head. Ready for your close up? Oh, God.
Yeah. Well, on that note of Pinhead, that's our discussion on Phantasm, everybody. But now we're going to head into our segment with including, I should mention, we didn't mention this last time because I got this music in between these 2 episodes, but a new track from Burial Grid for Between the Lines. And here it is. So Between the Lines is our segment where, Brian, myself, and maybe a guest, maybe Adam, has a recommendation that's kind of related to either Phantasm or indie horror that we're going to talk about here. So I'm going to start off, and my recommendation is another film from Don Coscarelli, his 2002 film that we referenced earlier, Bubba Hotep, which, if you're unaware, is a movie that stars Bruce Campbell, Ash himself from the Evil Dead movies, as an old retiree Elvis who believes he is Elvis and believes that at a certain point in his life, impersonator came over and was just like, hey, I'll trade places with you so you can live a quiet, secluded life out there. And that guy died, and so everyone thinks this guy isn't the real Elvis. And while he's living in this retirement home, he meets up with this guy who thinks he's JFK, played by Academy Award nominee, I believe, and civil rights activist Ossie Davis, who thinks he's JFK, and it's like, oh, they made me look like a black man. That's his whole thing. And they have to face off against a mummy who is sucking souls via the assholes of these old people and killing them that way. And it's based on a Joe R. Lansdale story. And I would say, I really think Phantasm was great. I think it's an awesome movie, as we've been talking about. But Bubba Hotep's my favorite. And I think it's because it combines a lot of, like, the sort of sillier side of, like, the sequels to Phantasm with genuine pathos. Like, it's a genuinely great performance from Campbell. And then the movie around him is so fun and weird and bizarre, but also it kind of pulls at your heartstrings at a certain point. I think it's my favorite non-Ash performance from Bruce Campbell. It feels like a genuinely great performance in the middle of this fun horror comedy B-movie from the guy who made Phantasm. It's his most straightforward, like we kind of mentioned earlier, but it's so silly. It is such like a silly, dumb story that at the same time you feel kind of emotional by the end of it. I don't know. I mean, I know you haven't seen it, Brian, because you've only seen Phantasm. But how does that sound to you as a movie?
Yeah, because we had talked about this a little bit recently, because you had described what the movie was, and it just sounds insane, and like it just lines up with what you guys were talking about earlier with Coscarelli, of like the guy was insane, like just had so many insane ideas. And I had seen like the picture of like the photo of him as Elvis.
Yeah.
But I just never knew what that movie was. It sounds insane. I kind of really want to see it because I love Bruce Campbell, as wink wink nudge nudge. But yeah, it sounds fucking weird.
Yeah. But Ben, we've seen this movie.
Yeah, man. Of course. You also left out the monologue about the nurse applying cream to the tumor end of his penis, and that
Right.
Elvis, and also that the mummy is dressed like a fuckboy cowboy.
Yep, he is.
He's got like the flaming cowboy shirt. yeah, dude, like, why is the mummy dressed as this fuckboy cowboy? What is happening? Bubba Hotep's the shit, dude. It's bizarre. Like you said, it's funny. But yeah, at the end, you're generally like, oh, man. Like, yeah, it hits you in the feels, too. I think it's his, because John dies at the end is a mess. Love it or hate it, it's a mess.
I like that movie.
I think Bubba it's kind of a mess, though.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think Bubba Hotep is, as far as, like, Coscarelli stuff, his most completely done film.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, because also we should shout out, speaking of Bubba Hotep and John dies at the end, Brian, they were trying to make a sequel for a long time, which would have been actually a prequel that would have been about slightly younger Elvis, still played by Campbell, but then also his Colonel Parker's would have been played by Paul Giamatti, because he genuinely loved Coscarelli and loved Bubba Hotep.
Bubba Nosferatu.
Bubba Nosferatu, yes. And they would have involved filming, I think, one of the Elvis movies.
Yep, and there was a Dracula.
Yeah, there's Dracula. Yep. Yes.
Oh my god.
Because they were filming. There's something like they were filming in Mexico or something instead of LA because of like tax write-offs.
Right.
And they ran across a coven of Mexican vampire women.
Oh my god.
Do you feel cheated that does never happen, Brian?
Yes, I'm hooked on just Giamatti as Colonel Parker. Like that's just immediately so great. What a choice.
If you loved Elvis, Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, I think this is also a great Elvis movie.
I'm kind of imagining Giamatti as Colonel Parker in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis.
Oh, he's what? Well, Brian, what's your recommendation for Between the Lines?
Yes, my recommendation is a movie we've talked about. We've mentioned it. It is The Evil Dead from 1981. Sam Raimi. Recently I watched the new Evil Dead Rise, and that has kind of gotten me in the mood to rewatch the original movies. I haven't seen them since high school, so it's been quite a while. And watching the first one again, I was really struck by how good it is. Like, when I first watched it, I kind of watched it through the lens of like most people kind of view Evil Dead 2 as being the masterpiece, and Evil Dead 1 is like pretty good, but not as good as part 2. But I love the first Evil Dead movie, and it's so again, kind of like Phantasm, is so weird and so unsettling, and also has a weird rhythm to it where it is so just nonstop and like keeps going over, and like it's also just so much creepier than I remember, because I think I remember a lot the kind of fun nature of Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, and like the first Evil Dead is so genuinely like horrifying and unsettling.
Is there one specific scene that might be the main reason
I mean,
why that's the case?
It is that scene.
Yeah.
What is? I'm very curious. That scene. Are we talking pencil to the ankle?
No, I was
No.
referring to the tree scene.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm jaded. Jesus Christ.
But no, that scene you mentioned with the pencil in the ankle is actually like just that whole sequence when like all hell is breaking loose in the actual cabin is so like just like tense for me. Like I was just like, oh my god, this is like just so terrifying and so like unsettling, and it's one of those movies where like it was all there. Like Raimi just kind of knew exactly, he had all the abilities to make just a great horror movie, and it just I love this movie. It's a great movie. I'm sure you guys love it as well, though.
It's weird. I'm from the Detroit suburbs,
Mm-hmm.
and it was sort of ingrained to us growing up. Like, oh, Evil Dead, you're gonna love Evil Dead because Sam Raimi and he's from here, Bruce Campbell, all that stuff. So it's like, okay, all right, cool. And then when I finally saw it, I gotta be honest. When I very first saw Evil Dead, I was like, okay, this is kind of corny. I don't know, like,
Right.
what the big thing about it is. And I saw Evil
Mhm.
Dead 2, and I'm like, oh, I immediately get it. Like, this is great. But I've also gone back and rewatched them again. And for the budget that it was, for the originality of it, for what he was able to achieve, Evil Dead is nothing short of a masterpiece, the original.
Yeah.
It's fucking wild that, I just take it as it was so good and so scary and so just fucked up. The only logical route to go with that franchise is comedy. Because how
Yeah.
can you get more extreme? How can you get more just sort of unnerving and spooky and scary without it becoming where people are laughing at how unnerved they are and everything? So you might as well just lean into it and make people laugh at the gore and make it as gory as you possibly can to make people laugh.
Yeah. I mean, I think The Evil Dead, I love that franchise. I would say it is my third favorite of the original trilogy, but I still think it's
Interesting.
really great for, like we mentioned, what it is, which is a movie, by the way, that cost only $75,000 more than Phantasm. But that one feels way more like barely making it. Phantasm looks a bit more professional, and then this movie is just like, these kids are out there in the middle of the woods. And they're just
there's like
doing the weirdest shit with
there's
these
one
cameras
set.
with like the board and shit. Yeah. And there's one set, it's this fucking cabin, and they're doing whatever the fuck, God knows what, in the woods of Michigan. And they've talked about that, like everybody involved with that production has talked about how like it was such like a grueling, awful experience. And then all the Evil Dead movies have had interesting experiences in terms of how they got made, what they kind of represent for the franchise. And the Evil Dead is definitely at least just like, the first in the evolution to comedy, but with horror stuff in Evil Dead 2. And then much more like a fantasy comedy with a couple horror set pieces by Army of Darkness. And then the show and all these other things. It's where all that stuff started. And it's definitely such a fascinating case of something else. Filmmaking ingenuity for like just Sam Raimi to be able to do any of these things at such a young age.
Just like the last thing I'll say is that like, because this is the indie episode, I think like it is sort of, it's the example when people have like the, you go out and you make a horror movie with your friends out in the woods, and it is like the prime example of that. And there's a reason for
Yeah,
it.
and yeah, for good reason. I agree.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. But now, Adam, what is your
Yeah,
pick
buddy.
for Between the Lines, buddy?
All right. So mine is not only independent, it's also foreign,
Yes.
and it also is one we've watched together.
Me and, yes, Thomas and Adam have watched this together, yes.
Thomas and Adam on a movie night, and I picked it because, as I said earlier, Phantasm definitely reminds me of like an American version of Italian sort of insane horror. I picked by one of the masters, Fulci, City of the Living Dead. Um, Now, again, much like Phantasm, it's kind of hard to paraphrase, like sort of put into
Summarize,
a
yeah.
box what this
Yes.
movie. Yeah, basic scheme is a priest kills himself, hangs himself in a cemetery, and because of it, the dead start coming back to life, but they can also teleport somehow. And also, if you look into the priest's eyes, he makes you go crazy to the point where there's one very prolonged practical effects scene, which is one of the greatest and most disgusting I've ever seen. Where this woman looks in the priest's eyes, she starts weeping blood, and then vomits up her entire intestinal tract
Yep.
on screen, and it's so fucking gross, and the noise and everything. But it's also got that great synth score. It's gory, it's violent, it makes zero sense. And it just the whole time I was watching Phantasm, like I said, I thought of this movie. I thought of Burial Ground. I thought of a lot of Argento. Like it's just this weird cerebral horror that it's more what they're showing you on a screen and the noises and the mood of it that's the scary stuff, other than like jump scares. And yeah, Saving the Living Dead for sure.
Yeah, I have seen this movie, like you mentioned, and I think the big thing is just like, we talked about Italian horror last week with, Black Sabbath, and that movie definitely has like a weird vibe to it, but it's not the goriness of like, that's 1980, right? You see The Living Dead?
It's
then
either 79 or 80.
Well, because then was The Beyond is like 81, which is like this is part of the Gates
Yeah.
of Hell trilogy, I believe, right? That's what it's called.
Yeah.
And it's like that movie, and then The Beyond, which is another great, like, just weird fucking movie. I think that movie's a lot of fun.
The Beyond's great.
Yeah, and then the third one is House by the Cemetery, right? And that one, I think, is not that memorable and kind of not good.
Cool shit in it, but not nearly to the level of the other two.
No, for sure. Do you have any idea what this movie is, Brian?
No, I mean, the title rules, and I've
Yeah.
seen the poster, and all of what Adam has just described sounds right up my alley. So,
I'd be curious for you to watch all three of those. I think you would have interesting reactions to them, to say the least. But yeah, let's go ahead and repeat our titles, as we like to do after we do Between the Lines, so you can add it to your watch list or whatever. My pick was the other Don Coscarelli film from 2002, Bubba Hotep.
yep, mine was the 1981 classic film from Sam Raimi, The Evil Dead.
And I had City of the Living Dead by Mr. Lucio Fulci.
We're going to be wrapping up the show here, so we want to do our thanks, including to, Burial Grid, who I mentioned earlier, does the music for our show, including the new Between the Lines music, which, trivia, was a piece that he just, had composed for another podcast, and they never made it. So I was just like, can I have that, please? And he said, sure. So thanks, man. Really appreciate it. But then we also should shout Michelle Kyle, who does our artwork. Find her at MishKyle96 on Twitter. And then thanks also to our supporters on Patreon, patreon.com/cinema2letter, which, we like putting out bonus content on there. And, at this time, Brian, we would have put out our full franchise on the Toy Story movies, which we haven't recorded yet, but we're excited to, since that officially won the poll. Also, Haunting in Venice, we would have released that. We just saw that, Brian, behind the scenes.
Yep.
Right before this recording, and we're going to talk about it, post on the Patreon, will be there. And then also, I think around this time, it'll be right before The Exorcist Believer comes out. So we're going to be doing that one, as well as we would have done The Creator prior to that. But yeah, so coming up soon, though, is Exorcist Believer, which we haven't seen yet. And also, Brian still has only seen the original. We haven't done our Exorcist 3 episode yet. So it'll be very interesting.
It's gotta be terrible.
I mean,
It's gotta be awful.
yeah. I mean, I don't. But how do you feel about that trailer, Brian? Have you seen it?
I mean, the trailer's not great, but like, I'm a really big fan of David Gordon Green. I love him. I think he's got such a fascinating career, from his like early like indie dramas to fucking Pineapple Express and like, you know, that shit. And then he's done like Halloween. I love his shows with Danny McBride. Like, yeah, I don't know. I'm hoping, you know, and I think you and I are defenders of Halloween Ends.
Fuck yeah,
So,
we are. Adam
yeah.
isn't. He really isn't.
Look,
Nah.
I get it.
Y'all can miss me with that shit.
I get it. But
No, I've grown more positive on it. I think Halloween Ends is still better than Halloween Kills.
Yeah.
But still, you know, fucking, you know what it is? I don't give a shit anymore. Like, it's fine. It exists.
Yeah.
It's fine. If people like it, people hate it. Who gives a fuck?
Plus, I don't know, Exorcist, we'll talk about this later in the season, but just...
No, Exorcist's gonna fucking suck.
Well, no, but
Exorcist's
just
gonna
the
fucking suck. I
franchise,
fucking hate it.
that as a franchise is so fucking weird. The
It's
way...
had two good movies.
Yeah, two great movies, and then but very weird bad movies. I think all of the bad movies are interesting for what they are.
One movie was so bad that they reshot it and
Yep.
released another bad version.
They did.
Like, that's fucking crazy.
Paul Schrader's versus Rennie Harlan,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
they should fight.
Yes.
Rennie Harlan, because he does good stuff.
Right. But anyway, yeah, so sign up for our Patreon for just the $1. You get all this bonus stuff I was mentioning earlier. And we appreciate all of you that currently donate. And we also wanted to send our appreciation to our guest, Adam. Adam, thank you so much for coming on. A pleasure for you to return to the mic. Do you have anything to plug at all? I don't know, because you've just basically been off the grid.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna stay that way.
Okay.
No, man, I'm just plugging along, cashing checks, snapping necks. Heyo. No, I got nothing, man. I might pop up here on a podcast here and there. And that's about it. Other than that, nope, got nothing. I don't even have a Facebook anymore.
Yeah.
I have a Twitter that I haven't accessed in months.
X,
Oh,
I
I'm sorry,
believe you
an
mean
X.
Yes, an X. Yeah.
There's an X. And then I have an Instagram that I occasionally post on, but other than that, no, I got nothing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for clearing your schedule enough and coming on.
You know, it's your fault I have nothing. Fucking
That's true. I left him poor and destitute after the series finale. Well, on that note, if you like all of this, you know, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, X, and Facebook under Cinema #2 letter. We're also on Blue Sky now. I used one of my invite codes if any of you are on that. I don't remember when that was supposed to be new Twitter, and then it's not quite.
Isn't there like an animation thing?
Well, yes,
Blue Sky?
R.I.P. Blue Sky Studios of the Ice Age franchise. That's true. But it's also
over?
a social media site now that's defunct.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's awesome.
I have an invite code if you're interested.
It's a great time to be on the internet.
I'm also on Angel Fire. Let me throw that out there.
Dial-up sounds. You gotta get past
Yeah.
those. Good lord. Well, yeah. You know, if you like any of that, specifically for me, I'm on Twitter, X, and Letterboxd at NotTheWho'sTommy. I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and over at film-cred.com.
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm on there sometimes, every once in a while. At my
I believe that's X, sir.
Shit. School.
no,
Roasted.
Elon can. No, I won't say anything on mic. But my
Right, not unless it's on the Patreon, another reason to subscribe.
no, they're all let loose on Elon. I got so many opinions on that. Fuck.
Son, why is there a Black Hawk helicopter landing in the yard?
Yes, but you can follow me on that dreaded website at my name, Bryan, followed by DRADE 3. Or you can follow me on Letterboxd and see what movies I'm watching, see my lists and all that.
And for more of all this stuff on audio, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, you might listen to all the other great shows on the network. And you can also dig into the archives on the Podbean feed for the the first season, as well as the old Double Edge Double Bill stuff with Adam. So much, 5 years worth of content that's still up online.
Why?
Well, we should mention before we get out of here, our next episode is our End for New, which our patrons voted on. Thank you, patrons. We should mention you also get to vote in polls and stuff. And you guys ended up picking for us Skinamarink from earlier this year. Now, Adam, you've told me you have not seen this movie. Is that still true?
No, I've watched it since
okay.
then.
Okay.
It's one of those movies to where if you are not in the right setting, it is not going to work. You have to be absolutely in as dark of a room as you can with no distractions and no outside noise if you can help it, and just watch it. If you got that shitty LED strip on the back of your screen, turn it off. Just watch it.
And so is that a positive or negative review?
Yeah.
No, I fucking hated it. No, I didn't hate it. It was fine. It's fine. But even then, though, and I did all of the things to get in that mindset, I was still like, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah. It's all right.
It's all right.
Right. Well, Brian, are you excited to talk about Skinamarink, another movie you haven't seen yet?
Yeah, it's a movie I haven't seen. I've heard a lot about it. I've seen a lot of screenshots, and in the Patreon poll, it was between this and The Invisible Man, but the patrons picked Skinamarink, and
you got the better choice. There's more to talk about, I think, with Skinamarink than Invisible Man.
Huh? Interesting. I like
that movie quite a bit.
I do as well, but
Invisible Man? Oh, me too. But I think there's. Invisible Man feels like such a polished, like they knew exactly what they were going for a horror movie, where Skinamarink is something different and new.
Well, true,
right.
very true.
In a way.
Mm-hmm. If it's kind of we're continuing the surreal horror.
Well, then that will do it.
And from everything I've heard, it should be interesting, and I'll be sending my therapy bills to each of the patrons.
Right, they pay $1.
Yep,
I'm sure that'll totally cover it. What we have for Patreon. Well, on that note, everybody, we'll say goodnight, and we'll especially send it out to all of you boys listening.